Most people hear Guantanamo Bay and think of the detention camp. But there's so much more to this place, a story that goes back over 100 years. It's a story of naval power, Cold War standoffs, and a unique, isolated American community living on Cuban soil. Let's dive into the untold story of Guantanamo Bay, or GTMO, as the locals call it. Our story starts not in the 21st century, but way back in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. The U.S. saw Guantanamo Bay's deep-water harbor as a prime strategic location for its navy. After the war, the newly independent Cuba was pressured into signing the Cuban-American Treaty of 1903. This treaty granted the United States a perpetual lease for the area for the purpose of a coaling and naval station. The price, about 2,000 gold coins per year, which is roughly $4,000 today. And believe it or not, the U.S. still sends that payment every year. But since the 1959 revolution, Cuba has refused to cash the checks, viewing the U.S. presence as illegal. They've only cashed one, apparently by mistake, back in the early days of the revolution. So, for decades, Guantanamo Bay Naval Base was just that, a naval base. It was a sleepy outpost in the Caribbean, but everything changed when Fidel Castro came to power. Suddenly, this American base was smack in the middle of a hostile, communist country. The Cold War had arrived at its doorstep. The base became a fortress, a symbol of American presence just 90 miles from Florida. The perimeter was fortified, not just with fences, but with a massive minefield, one of the largest in the world at the time. This minefield, laid by the U.S. in the early 60s, was meant to stop any potential Cuban invasion. It created a literal no-man's land, separating the base from the rest of Cuba. The Cubans responded by planting their own barrier of cacti, jokingly called the Cactus Curtain. For years, U.S. Marines and Cuban border guards stared each other down across this heavily guarded frontier. Life inside the base was surreal. It was like a small American town dropped into the Caribbean, completely cut off from its host nation. There was a high school, a bowling alley, a golf course, and even the only McDonald's on Cuban soil. Residents, mostly military personnel, and their families couldn't just pop over to the next town. Everything had to be flown or shipped in, from groceries to cars. It was a bubble of 1950s Americana, frozen in time, and surrounded by political tension. One of the most fascinating aspects of this period was the water dispute. For years, the base got its fresh water piped in from a nearby Cuban river. But after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Castro cut off the supply. He literally had the pipes disconnected. The U.S. response was swift and decisive. They built their own desalination plant, making the base completely self-sufficient for water and electricity. This move was a powerful statement: we are not leaving, we don't need you. Another untold chapter is the story of the Cuban commuters. Before the revolution, thousands of Cubans crossed the border every day to work on the base. They were a vital part of the economy and the community. After 1959, the flow of new workers stopped, but a few hundred of the original workers were allowed to keep their jobs. For over 50 years, these men and women made the daily journey, aging into their roles as a living link between two worlds. They would walk through the heavily guarded gates, spend their day in an American world, and then return home to Cuba in the evening. The last of these commuters retired just a few years ago, ending a truly unique chapter of labor history. Then, in the 1990s, GTMO's mission changed dramatically. It wasn't about the Cold War anymore. After a coup in Haiti, thousands of Haitians fled by sea, and the U.S. used Guantanamo Bay as a massive processing center for these refugees. For a time, the base housed tens of thousands of people in sprawling tent cities. A similar situation occurred shortly after with Cuban rafters fleeing their own country. The base transformed from a naval station into a large-scale humanitarian operation, testing its resources and personnel in completely new ways. This refugee crisis is a largely forgotten part of GTMO's history, overshadowed by what came next. And that brings us to the chapter everyone knows, or thinks they know. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the Bush administration decided to use Guantanamo Bay to hold and interrogate suspected terrorists captured in the War on Terror. The location was chosen specifically because it was believed to be outside the jurisdiction of U.S. federal courts, a legal gray area. This is when Camp 10 Ray and later Camp Delta were built, and the iconic images of detainees in orange jumpsuits became seared into the global consciousness. The establishment of the detention camp turned GTMO into one of the most controversial places on Earth. It sparked global debates about human rights, the laws of war, and the balance between security and liberty. The legal battles were intense. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that detainees did have the right to challenge their detention in U.S. courts, piercing the idea of Guantanamo as a legal black hole. But the controversy has never really gone away. Presidents have tried to close the detention camp, but political and logistical challenges have always stood in the way. What do you do with the remaining detainees? Where do they go? These are complex questions with no easy answers. But while the world's attention has been focused on the detention facilities, life on the naval base itself continues. The families are still there, the kids still go to W.T. Sampson High School, and the community still bowls on Friday nights. They live with the reality of being neighbors to one of the most famous prisons in the world. It's a strange duality, a sleepy American town on one side, a high-security detention center on the other, all on a piece of land that's technically part of a country that wants you gone. Today, Guantanamo Bay Naval Base remains a place of immense strategic importance and historical complexity. It's not just one story. It's a story of military strategy, of Cold War tension, of a bizarre cultural bubble, of refugee crises, and of a profound and ongoing legal and moral debate. The full history of GTMO is far more than just the headlines we've seen over the past 2 decades. It's a slice of American and Cuban history, a geopolitical anomaly that continues to evolve and challenge our understanding of borders, law, and national identity. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories that shape our world. See you next time.